Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has stepped into one of Southeast Asia's most sensitive diplomatic disputes, quietly helping Thailand and Cambodia lower tensions after a dangerous border crisis threatened to spiral into a wider regional problem. The crisis between Thailand and Cambodia was not just another diplomatic disagreement. It involved troops, civilians, territory, national pride, and painful memories from a long-running border dispute. 4 months, the situation remained tense, with both sides accusing each other of provocation and warning that the other was responsible for the violence. At the center of this regional concern was a border that has been disputed for decades. Thailand and Cambodia share a long frontier, and some parts of that border have remained politically and historically sensitive. The most difficult areas are connected to ancient temple zones, contested land, and competing national narratives. These disputes have repeatedly triggered diplomatic arguments, military alerts, and occasional armed clashes. But the latest crisis became especially alarming because it was not limited to angry words. Fighting reportedly caused deaths, displaced many civilians, and raised fears that 2 ASEAN neighbors could be pulled into a prolonged confrontation. Families living near the border were forced to flee. Local communities were disrupted. Schools, markets, and villages were affected by the fear of renewed violence. For Southeast Asia, this was a serious warning sign. ASEAN has always tried to present itself as a region of dialogue, cooperation, and stability. But when 2 member states begin exchanging accusations and troops remain on alert, the credibility of regional diplomacy is tested. That is where Marcos' role became important. ASEAN Chair Marcos had to manage the crisis carefully. He could not force Thailand or Cambodia to accept a settlement. He could not erase decades of border tension in one meeting. But he could create the space for both sides to talk, reduce the heat, and prevent the situation from getting worse. That is exactly what happened when Cambodian Prime Minister Manet and Thai Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul met on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Cebu. The meeting was arranged with the support of the Philippines, and it became a key moment in efforts to calm the border crisis. The significance of the meeting was not only in what was said publicly. It was in the fact that both leaders sat together at all. After months of violence, suspicion, and nationalist anger, direct dialogue had become difficult. Both governments were under pressure from their own people. Any leader seen as weak on sovereignty could face criticism at home. That made the Cebu meeting a delicate diplomatic achievement. Marcos did not present himself as a loud mediator or a dominant figure in the process. Instead, he took a quieter part. He focused on bringing the 2 sides together, encouraging restraint, and giving both leaders a platform to show that peace was still possible. After the meeting, Marcos made clear that the talks happened because both leaders understood the danger of continued conflict. Marcos said this was possible because of a very clear, fervent belief by both leaders that it is time for peace and no longer a time for war. That line captured the heart of the moment. The crisis had reached a point where continued fighting would bring no real benefit to either country. Thailand and Cambodia could continue arguing over territory, history, and legal claims, but another round of violence would only deepen suffering on both sides. For ordinary people living near the border, the issue was not about speeches or political pride. It was about safety. It was about whether families could return home, whether children could go back to school, and whether farmers and traders could resume their normal lives without fear of shells, gunfire, or sudden evacuations. Thai Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul also stressed the human cost of conflict. Anutin said, Thailand and Cambodia are 2 neighboring countries. It is best that we avoid conflict. It only brings losses and suffering. His words were important because they acknowledged what border communities already knew. War between neighbors does not produce victory for ordinary people. It produces fear, destroyed livelihoods, and long-term resentment. Anutin also pointed toward a future beyond confrontation. Anutin said, "Now is the time for us to look forward and walk this path together towards peace." That statement gave the meeting a forward-looking tone. It suggested that Thailand was ready, at least publicly, to support dialogue and avoid another immediate escalation. Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet also emphasized the need for de-escalation and rebuilding trust. Hun Manet said, "Our discussions focused on de-escalation and trust-building measures to restore and consolidate a functioning FO. Aim work for lasting peace and normalized relations." This was a key message from Cambodia. It showed that PF Phnom Penh wanted more than a symbolic handshake. The Cambodian side was talking about mechanisms, trust building, and a working framework that could prevent future clashes. Still, the road ahead remains difficult. The Thailand-Cambodia border dispute has deep roots. It is connected to history maps, colonial-era boundaries, ancient sites, and national identity. These are not easy issues to settle quickly. Even when governments agree to talk, tensions can return if soldiers on the ground misread each other's actions or if political voices at home inflame public opinion. That is why the Cebu meeting should be seen as a beginning, not an ending. Marcos helped lower the temperature, but he did not magically solve the dispute. The real test will come in the weeks and months after the meeting. Both Thailand and Cambodia will need to keep communication open. Military commanders on both sides will need clear instructions. Diplomats will need to work quietly. Political leaders will need to avoid language that could provoke anger or suspicion. The meeting also came at a time when Thailand and Cambodia were facing another source of tension: offshore energy exploration. Thailand had moved to end a long-standing agreement with Cambodia on joint energy development in disputed maritime areas. That decision added another layer of strain to relations between the two countries. Energy issues are deeply sensitive because they involve national resources, economic interests, and sovereignty. When energy disputes overlap with border tensions, the risk of political escalation becomes even greater. That made Marcos' intervention more urgent. The crisis was no longer only about a land border. It was becoming part of a wider relationship problem between Bangkok and Phnom Penh. If left unmanaged, the dispute could have affected trade, energy cooperation, regional unity, and ASEAN's ability to respond to security challenges. For ASEAN, this was an important test. The organization often works through consensus and avoids public pressure on member states. This approach has helped maintain unity, but it can also make ASEAN look weak during crises. Critics often say the bloc moves too slowly when urgent problems arise. In this case, however, ASEAN still provided something useful: a neutral diplomatic setting. The summit in Cebu gave Thailand and Cambodia a place to meet without either side appearing to surrender or give in. Marcos used that opportunity to encourage dialogue without humiliating either leader. That is one reason quiet diplomacy can be powerful. It allows leaders to step back from confrontation while saving face. In Southeast Asian diplomacy, where respect, pride, and public image matter deeply, saving face can be essential for peace. Marcos' role also strengthened the Philippines' image as a regional diplomatic player. In recent years, Manila has been more visible because of its own disputes with China in the South China Sea. But this crisis allowed Marcos to show that the Philippines was not only focused on its own security concerns. It was also willing to help manage conflict among ASEAN neighbors. That matters because leadership in ASEAN is not only about military strength or economic size. It is also about the ability to build trust, host difficult conversations, and keep the region from breaking apart during tense moments. For Marcos, the Cebu talks showed that diplomacy does not always need to be loud to be effective. Sometimes the most important work happens behind closed doors, before cameras enter the room and before official statements are released. The Thailand-Cambodia crisis also reminds the region that peace is never automatic. Even countries that share deep cultural, economic and geographic ties can fall into confrontation when old disputes remain unresolved. Nationalism can make compromise harder. Social media can spread anger quickly. Political pressure can push leaders towards stronger positions than they might privately prefer. That is why crisis management is so important. One misunderstanding at the border can become a firefight. One firefight can become retaliation. Retaliation can force leaders to respond more aggressively. Before long, a local incident can become a national crisis. The goal of diplomacy is to stop that chain before it becomes uncontrollable. Marcos' effort in Cebu appeared to do exactly that. By bringing Manet and Anutin together, he helped create a diplomatic off-ramp. Both leaders were able to speak about peace, restraint, and future cooperation. That does not guarantee lasting peace, but it reduces the risk of immediate escalation. For people living far from the border, this may look like a simple meeting, but for communities that experienced fear and displacement, even a small diplomatic breakthrough can mean hope. It can mean fewer troops moving forward. It can mean fewer families preparing to flee. It can mean a chance for normal life to return. The challenge now is turning words into action. Thailand and Cambodia will need practical steps. They may need stronger hotlines between military units. They may need joint monitoring mechanisms. They may need clearer border communication. They may need to revive diplomatic channels that can address problems before they explode. Both sides will also need to manage domestic expectations. Leaders cannot simply speak about peace abroad while allowing hostile messaging at home to grow unchecked. Public opinion matters, and if citizens are constantly told that the other side is the enemy, diplomacy becomes much harder. That is why the language used by the leaders in Cebu was important. Each statement pointed away from war and toward cooperation. Each leader gave his own public audience a reason to accept dialogue. Marcos framed the meeting as a choice for peace. Anutin spoke about the suffering caused by conflict. Manet focused on de-escalation and trust building. Together, those messages created a calmer political atmosphere, but no one should mistake calm for complete resolution. The border issue remains. The historical grievances remain. The maritime energy dispute remains. The military sensitivities remain. The possibility of renewed tension remains real. Yet the Cebu meeting proved that both sides still have a path away from confrontation. For ASEAN, that is the most important outcome. The region cannot afford another internal conflict at a time when it is already dealing with major challenges, including economic uncertainty, maritime disputes, energy pressure, and the continuing crisis in Myanmar. Prolonged Thailand-Cambodia confrontation would only weaken regional unity further. Marcos' quiet role helped prevent that from happening, at least for now. He did not announce a grand peace deal. He did not claim to have solved everything. But he helped bring two leaders back to the table after a dangerous period of violence and mistrust. In diplomacy, that can be a meaningful success. The coming months will show whether the talks in Cebu become a turning point or just a temporary pause. If Thailand and Cambodia continue dialogue, reduce troop tensions, and rebuild trust, the meeting could be remembered as a moment when Southeast Asia stepped back from the edge. But if old grievances return and border incidents resume, the crisis could quickly reignite. For now, the message from Cebu is clear. Peace is still possible when leaders choose dialogue over confrontation. And in a region where history often weighs heavily on the present, Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s quiet diplomatic push may have helped Thailand and Cambodia avoid a much more dangerous chapter